taking the opportunity to listen in on something that should be very near and dear to your heart, not just for yourself, but for your children and grandchildren, future. This is okay. This is certainly a topic that has been discussed quite a bit lately. The California Master Plan has been celebrating a very historic anniversary this year, and has been discussed several times. There is a committee in the legislature that is reviewing the master plan. The Public Policy Institute of California has weighed in the master plan, the Legislative Analyst's Office, a whole host of players in California have weighed in on the master plan. Of course, it's a source of pride to all Californians. A source of pride because we hold it up as an example of what California was about, should be about. There's a question of whether it was ever about. But education and educating all Californians has certainly been a goal of California and achieving the California dream, and for many people that means different things. It's certainly what the master plan was meant to promote. But it's been quite a while since there's been an official visit of the master plan. And the last panel we had dove into where the master plan originated. We talked about the initial vision. We talked about some of the issues that have led to the discussions that we're having today, which are basically surround the issue regarding the education gap, the achievement gap, not only in California, but really throughout the United States, particularly in California. The Public Policy Institute of California, not too long ago, released a publication called Higher Education in California, New Goals for the Master Plan, which again highlighted the need to look at the master plan in light of the fact that a previous study that they conducted found that California will fall short by 1 million college-educated, college-degree individuals in the workforce by 2025. And that's an alarming number because it has a direct impact on the economy of California. There are many reasons for that, some of which have to do with the fact that many of the adults who were educated, who came to California with college degrees, are no longer coming. For a while there, California had one of the highest, if not the highest, adult rates for individuals holding a degree. Much of that, about half of that, was due in part because so many people were immigrating to California with degrees, because of the opportunities that exist in California, whether because of the aerospace industry, because of the industry, or any of a number of areas that really focused on professions that require a degree. So many of those folks who were coming to California from either India, China, Ohio, anywhere across the United States, are no longer coming. So that exacerbates the problem that we have, which is we are not organically growing enough college graduates or individuals with some amount of college completed in order to compete in today's workforce. So that's sort of a background summary of why this topic has become so controversial, because it really gets to the root of what's going on in California, gets to the heart of the immigration debate, gets to the heart of what's going on in our economy, the evolution in our economy, and what's going on in our public schools, both K-12 and higher education. So, with us today to touch on some of these topics and to touch on specifically what they see as the future of the education master plan in California are a panel of three very, actually four, distinguished individuals who have had quite a lot when we turn to them. We have Christopher Cabaldon, who is at the very moment spending a lot of time focused on the master plan. He's the American Foundation, which is funding an effort to help support and to inform the legislature on the master plan here in California. We have Patten, who is the president of the California Legislature statewide academic senate. We have Dr. F.D. Alexander, who is the president of Cal State University of Long Beach, Beach. And we have Tom Hayden, who former rebel rouser, former legislator, and still rebel rouser. Former. But Mr. Hayden also spent a great deal of time in the legislature focused on higher education, specifically reviewing the master plan, so he has a unique perspective of where we've been and where we need to go. So, with that background, let me turn to our panel, and I'm just going to go down the table and ask our panelists to, first of all, tell us a little bit about themselves and their work with the higher education master plan. And then if you could also tell us a little bit about what you see is going on today, what you see in the future of California's master plan. And then we can get into, as we go along, get into some specific topics that will hopefully stir a little controversy and a little critical thinking about where we need to go with the state. So why don't we begin with Christopher?
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. I've been working on the master plan almost since birth. I'm a master plan baby. I came in the room. And when I was in college, I was the representative of the students of California in the 1989 review of the master plan. Then came to work in the California State Legislature for the Assembly Higher Education Committee, chaired by then Senator Tom Hayden. And we ran another review of the master plan for higher education that went on for 1994. Then became Vice Chancellor of the California Community Colleges system-wide and represented the community college system in the 2002 master plan, 2002 master plan. We've been doing this almost every single master plan review that's occurred except for the 1974 review. And I mentioned that just so you understand my biases as both a former student activist, somebody who brings a legislative perspective, but also has been inside the institution and understands the dynamics that many of you are trying to deal with here as well. For those of you who weren't at the panel that I wasn't at either about the history of the master plan, I do think some review is important, especially from my perspective because I'm not orthodox on the master plan. When we're celebrating its 50th anniversary, I think it is a mistake to think of the master plan as something akin to the U.S. Constitution or the Bible or some other document that is the product of supremely visionary individuals who sat down and thought about what the world might look like 20 to 30 to 100 years hence, and I've articulated an integrated, comprehensive, fully equipped vision for that future, and then put all the pieces in place for it to happen. That isn't what happened. This is what psychologists would call the fundamental attribution error, looking at what occurred and then assigning intention and competence to people who were just trying to make it from Tuesday to Wednesday in 1960 and 1959. And what they really were doing was not trying to put together a long-term vision for what California ought to be. They were trying to develop a cartel agreement that would today violate antitrust laws. And they were saying, what can we agree on that we won't compete against one another in doing? That was their fundamental objective. Not, as we think about it today, how to expand access, not about how to improve the California economy. It was how do we make sure that we don't compete ourselves to death between, at the time, what were essentially two institutions. The State Board of Education ran both the state university and sort of the community colleges, and then the Regents ran the University of California. And this is in a world that is sort of pre-pluralism. Right? It was at a time there was no MALDEF, the NAACP wasn't involved in education policy. It was really the case that a chancellor and a UC president and three of their friends could get in the car, drive to Santa Barbara, and by the time they got back, having had a nice seafood dinner, have an agreement on what the world might look like. The idea that the rest of us would be involved in that conversation really wasn't present. And it was before the legislature was full-time. And So the legislature, sort of the representative of our democracy, was hand-delivered a copy of this master plan that they wrote in the car on the way to Santa Barbara and back, and adopted it, but it was not a democratically written document in that sense. So I think it's important to think about its origins, because we do sometimes try to assign to it this almost religious significance about what it meant, what it was intended to be. And if I had been willing to check my baggage, I would have brought the master plan, which is this thick. But we really only refer to 3 or 4 provisions of it today. Most of it never was implemented. Most of it has completely been forgotten. Only a couple of key provisions are still around now. And it's important because that religious sense about it has made it almost unchangeable. It is unacceptable to question anything in the master plan because we assign to it the success of California. The reason why the University of California is successful is because of the master plan. The reason why community colleges are such important engines of economic and social opportunity is because of the master plan. It ain't true, but when you say that, then you can't question those fundamental choices that were made in 1960. It is sort of a very irrational design. If we had had a system today and I came to you and said, why don't we have, let's choose to take the students who have the greatest learning needs, the farthest behind coming out of high school, or they have the most challenges at home in terms of having to work the family restaurant while they're going to school, or they have no parents, they're emancipated foster youth. Let's take those students. Let's take them to a campus separate from where they might get their ultimate bachelor's degree. Spend hardly any money on them. Give them a couple of years, and then transplant them into another place where those students who had all the advantages have already been for the prior 2 years and have had lots of money spent on them, and then to say, okay, now compete. You would say that is the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. That obviously can't work, but that's the fundamental assumption of what the master plan is all about. So it's important because we think about the master plan as something that provided broad access to higher education. And we forget that at the time of 1960, CSU was actually accepting a larger proportion of high school graduates. The master plan said, CSU, we want you to be more exclusive. We want you to cut access to your institution. UC was doing the same thing. UC was accepting a much larger proportion than 12.5% as they do today of California's high school graduates. The master plan said, no more. We want both of the universities to be more elitist, more exclusive, and in exchange, we will not create, but we will evolve the community college system into a universally accessible institution, and everyone else can go there, with the implicit idea that it would be easy to transfer. But none of the actual mechanics for making that transfer process easy and seamless and workable were actually put into place. Just an assumption that if we set up these two institutions, it will happen. So this is it's an important background for the master plan as we think about the challenges for today. It has been reviewed, as we've said, 5 or 6 times now, assuming what we count as a master plan review, and none of them have changed any of the fundamentals. No master plan review ever. And so as we think about what's coming up, what's happening right now in the legislature, in terms of reviewing the master plan, I think we ought to think about the value of going after hunting after unicorns, and so to some extent allowing that to distract us from what are actual, actionable, achievable reforms in California public higher education that actually would make a difference for addressing exactly the issues that President Garcia has talked about in terms of the need for significantly larger numbers of college graduates and, compared to 1959 and 1960, the need for a much larger proportion of Californians to be part of our economic prosperity. That was not the challenge. And they didn't see that as their objective. It was, how do we take this level of student who is full-time, who is already succeeding, and make it possible for them to get through. It was not, how do we transform the sense of who is entitled to economic and social success in California. So, as we think about it, that's one contextual risk. The other is to think about the fiscal situation. Because it's very tempting for a lot of us in higher education to say, well, let's not look at the master plan, we don't want to bother with it because it's so important, and I grew up with it, and if we don't want to set anything, we can just hold on for a couple of years. Let's make it until next budget year. Maybe the budget will turn around, or maybe somebody will get some more revenues, and we'll be able to go back to the way that it used to be. Let's not tinker with these fundamental issues, because what we really need to do is focus on getting those dollars back. Let's just remember that the fiscal crisis that we're in today is not a short-term crisis. Even if the economy were to start booming next year, which no one is forecasting, but even if it were, the rebound in property tax, corporate tax, income tax, sales tax revenues that would take at least 3 to 4 years after that to emerge. And that ignores the fact that the legislature sees that coming, right? So the economy turns around next year, so 2011. The legislature knows that's coming, so they know 2 years from there, there'll be more revenues coming in. They start spending those already to deal with the existing deficit. So I think it's a reasonable assumption that we're going to be in essentially this fiscal situation, something close to it, which is no improvements, and doing our best to avoid the most devastating cuts, for at least 8 to 10 years, and maybe permanently. And so as we think about what a master plan looks like, it has to account for that. It cannot ignore the fiscal realities. It cannot just say our focus is only on how do we get back to what the world was like in 2008 or 2007. So that's a key part. So there are a lot of things that we ought to think about in terms of making a master plan that is based on student success, whereas the 1960 master plan was mainly based on institutions and competition. And then history was rewritten so that we thought that the master plan in 1960 was mainly about access, but now it needs to be about students actually succeeding at their goals. A master plan that is focused around also what the states, the public policy objectives of higher education are. And we'll talk about this later, but the notion of, do we have a system that's based entirely on which students want to do cosmetic surgery, or should we spend $45,000 a year on a student who wants to get a cosmetic surgery degree to UCLA, and then turn away 25 or 40 or 50 students who need basic English as a second language skills from Long Beach City College as a result? And that's the fiscal choice that we're making today. So do we have a system that's based not just on student demand and student choices, but also on what the public benefit is? We have a system that ought to be more regional in its sense. There's very effective collaboration here between the Long Beach School, Long Beach City College, the university, but this is something that emerges despite the way that our systems of higher education are structured. So should we ought to be moving toward a more regional approach? And what about scope? We have allowed ourselves to think, especially in community colleges as an open access institution, that access is everything. And so, as I was earlier visiting the Student Success Center, and I asked, we've got very effective programs here for dealing with students who are 1 year behind, being ready for the first year of college in math or English, maybe 2 years behind. What do you do when somebody walks in with 4th grade reading skills? And we have allowed ourselves to think that's the community college's job, and we don't know how to do it right. And where does that stop? If somebody walks in and says, I don't know my colors. The master plan is so focused around universal open access that we've not been able to force ourselves to make choices and to say, this really matters, and we're going to focus there, and other things we're going to say no to. So I think we have some real opportunities to do some big things in policy reforms around student success that are related to the master plan. But I just wanted, at the opening, give a caution about assessing about the structure of the review of a master plan as the way to achieve transformative future.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Jane Patten. I'm the president of the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges. I am reassigned out of my college full-time to serve the faculty at the state level. And I've got about 36 years in the state teachers retirement system. I'm happy to say it's still solvent. I hope that continues. I began my teaching career teaching high school, then went to community college, went to USC and got a doctorate in higher education. Then I went to teach at a university, undergraduate and graduate students, and came back to the community colleges because I realized that I made a mistake and that's where I really wanted to be. So I've seen education from a variety of positions, and I find it particularly interesting to go into Sacramento now, although I compared it to Alice in Wonderland a couple of weeks ago because people talk backwards and I don't really know what they're saying in Sacramento. It's quite a challenge. And surrounded by folks who've had a lot more experience in the political arena, I'll just give you some of my Alice in Wonderland perspectives from my work at the State Academic Senate. I've had the opportunity to interact with Ira Ruskin, one of the assembly members who is heading up the master plan review, and I've been very impressed with him because he's reached out to faculty of all 3 segments, and I think he's been willing to listen and learn, and I think he's very thoughtful and deliberative. So I've been very pleased that he's the person heading up the current conversation. The master plan, and the Joint Committee for the Review of the Master Plan issued their initial report yesterday. It's very short. It's really just a cursory scan of what I hope will be a longer report. And at the end of my talk, I'll share with you what some of their recommendations were and my sort of take on those perspectives. The question that I was given today to consider is, how do you think California should move forward or restructure the master plan to meet the educational needs of California? I see that there are really three questions which I'll try to address in my few minutes here. One is, how should we move forward, whether we should restructure the master plan, and what are the educational needs of California students of the future. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the needs of California. We've already heard a number of them enumerated. I'd like to look at the needs of students, the workplace, the state, and higher education. So if we look at the needs of our students, we know that our students are more diverse than ever. We know that they come to college with a large set of needs, including the fact that 70 up to 90% have some basic skills needs when they arrive on our doorstep. We know that more students today need English as a second language, and more than ever they're attending college part-time. Some of those factors are of their choice, some are not of their choice. It's a very complex mixture of characteristics. We know that our students are very different from those who are eligible for UC and CSU. Some of them are studying English as a second language. They may have been away from school for many years, and then they come back to get retraining for a job or to begin their career or begin their college education. Some of our students may not have had a good experience in previous education, so there may be some barriers just to their self-esteem and to their ability to be able to step right into the college. And the thing that I think is really important is that the outcomes of these various students may not always be a degree, the awarding of a degree. Because if a student enters our colleges completely unable to speak English and attends ESL for 2 or 3 years and becomes able to then get a job and be a productive citizen without attaining a degree necessarily, I think that's an important outcome. I'm not suggesting that should be the only outcome, and I'm not saying we shouldn't reach out and try to get them to move beyond that. But I get frustrated when we get focused too much on the outcome and forget that any incremental improvement in the lives of many of our students is quite significant for them and for society. The workplace, as you know, has all kinds of changing needs. I mean, if you look at the building technologies, if you look at the healthcare occupations, if you look at technology, I live in Silicon Valley, and technology is changing all the time. Community colleges are really positioned to be a lot more nimble and flexible. We can write courses that may not be transferable courses, but we can do courses in the workplace. We can develop training for folks short order through our contract education and our community education. And I think these are important attributes of community colleges. If we look at the needs of the state, probably the most fundamental need of the state is to have an educated populace. We need people who are productive, contribute to society, and hopefully are not imprisoned for a lot of years, which is where so much of our money does go. We certainly know that the state needs more high school graduates, and we certainly need more college graduates and folks who earn associate's degree and higher and who earn certificates. We also find in some of the reports that I'm going to mention to you in a moment that we need more students to go directly to college out of high school. And it's unfortunate that many students do not go right to college. They take time off, and the longer they're away, the less their chances are of succeeding when they get to college. They forget their learning. Students who haven't studied mathematics in 5 years have a lot of catch-up to do. If on the other hand, they had taken math even before, they're able to step into the next level much more readily. And we certainly do need more students who transfer to the universities, and we need more students who earn baccalaureate and higher degrees. And I think that President Oakley made an important point when he said how many of our students in the past had baccalaureates, that it's because they came from out of state, and we did attract a large number of folks in the past. Unfortunately, today, some of the educated folks are moving out of state, or they're actually leaving the state to go to a university because they can't get into 1 year. We're finding more and more students are going into, there's Arizona, or obviously folks right on the borders are going to go to places like Arizona and Nevada, but folks are going across the country. We also have a huge number of students today who are going to private institutions, often for-profit, like Phoenix and some of the other private or for-profit institutions. But I'd also like to consider the needs of our public higher education institutes. I feel really strongly about the need for the public to support higher education. And although I actually went to SC, I do support public higher education, and that's where I spent my whole career. The first and most critical thing that we need for higher education in all segments is capacity. One of the problems with transfer, and people say we need to fix transfer, while we absolutely need to make changes, the biggest problem is there aren't enough seats for the students, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that when we hear from CSU. There are obviously serious problems with the achievement gap, and I'm glad that President Oakley brought that up immediately. There is a hugely disproportionate amount of success of students from Latino populations, African American populations, immigrant students. This is a serious statewide problem, certainly beginning in K-12, but absolutely going into higher education as well. And I think that efforts like the early assessment program that I know Long Beach is participating in is an important first step. We need to do a much better job of linking secondary and post-secondary. The state certainly needs to support higher education at a better level. It has never really funded higher education at the level that is necessary, and we're seeing that even more today with the reductions that we've had to make in all of the higher ed institutions. I think there definitely is opportunity for economy of scale, and I think that there probably are opportunities for improving the way money is spent. And actually, we just heard an example of where we're putting our priorities on the grad school students who cost a fortune, or on the students who really need their first few years of college. Those priorities, I think, are certainly need to be rethought. Colleges today also need to provide the support services that our students need. And if you're here at Long Beach, I imagine that you experience the kind of cuts to categorical programs that were felt across the state. This is an absolute crime, given the students that we have, because they need counseling, they need tutoring, they need EOPS and Puente and all the fantastic programs that we have. But sadly, they've been decimated across the state, and I don't see us coming out of that hole in the near future. So I'd like to mention to you a couple of reports that have been written recently which suggest some ways that we should adjust our priorities and make some changes in public higher education. The Legislative Analyst's Office published a report called The Master Plan at 50. It has a longer title, but that's close enough. And there were several suggestions that the Leg Analyst's Office recommended. They're suggesting that there needs to be better coordination among the segments, and I'm hard-pressed to see anybody who would disagree with that. We need to work better together. It's been too frequent that each segment argues for their own segment and does not look at students as a student in all of higher education. I was involved in some conversations in the last year about how can we do a better job of reaching out to our prospective students and their parents and to the community. And I think one of the critical things we need to do is to treat a student as our student. CSU, UC, and community colleges. They are our students, not mine and his. They are our students. And if we could think of us as more of a united, coordinated three public segments of higher education, that seems very wise. Nancy Shulock is a scholar at CSU Sacramento, and her scholarship is Community College Leadership and Policy. And she has written a series of reports. I will admit that the faculty have been critical of some of the things she said, but they've also been supportive of some of the things she said. A few things that her institute has produced recently recommend the following. Again, they say coordination is a serious problem among the three segments. That we award too few degrees in public higher education. And I'd like to amplify something that President Oakley said a moment ago. California now ranks 40th in the United States for the number of students who go directly from high school to post-secondary. 40 out of 50. We're 40th. And we rank third in the number of 65-year-olds who have degrees. But if you look at the students who were in their 20s and early 30s, we're in the 29th percentile in the number of students who have degrees in that age group. So there's quite a disparity. Nancy Shulock in her research raised, I think, a couple of very provocative questions. She said we have to choose between choice and structure. And what she means by that is when a student walks through our doors, they sort of have unlimited choices in our colleges. They can kind of take almost anything they want. Not exactly, but almost. And yet many students succeed better if they're given structure. If they're given a pattern of courses to take, a sequence of courses to take, if they're sort of led through it. And I think there is some wisdom in that. I think we need to explore that a lot more. We also have to choose, she said, between local and state. In other words, again, each college can make we fight fiercely for local control. And local control is important in many ways for community colleges because we serve our communities. But sometimes having a coordinated state goal might be better for the students and for the state. I will say that among the faculty, we struggle with those questions all the time. And a classic example is when we changed the math and English graduation requirements a few years ago. Some colleges did not require English, 1A English composition course for graduation, while others did, and the same with mathematics. And many folks said, you know, it's local control, we should choose. And ultimately, the decision was that it wasn't in the state's interest and the students' interest to continue with allowing colleges not to have a minimum level of English and mathematics. And then the Public Policy Institute of California set some new goals for the master plan, and these were some of the goals they stressed. We need to change the eligibility requirements for universities. We need to increase enrollment. We need to increase transfer, graduation rates. And also, that particular report suggested that CSU's plan that they're working on now to require students to complete all the remediation in the first year, they saw that as a good thing, as a favorable thing. So the question is, should the master plan be changed? One of the things that I valued about the original master plan was that there was a stated commitment to access, a delineation of the missions among the three segments, and a philosophy of affordability. And I think those are still laudable goals to guide us as we look into the future. One of the challenges that I mentioned before had to do with an increasing desire for accountability and for outcomes in all of higher education. And I think I would agree that we definitely can do a better job. We absolutely need to have more students earning degrees, and we need to move away not just from access, but certainly to success. But I want to share a short story with you that I think relates to education as well as to medicine. Physicians report that the outcomes for their patients who come to them with chronic diseases is much worse than it is for other patients. I want to say, duh. So if a patient with chronic disease goes to the doctor, his or her chances of complete recovery or a long, healthy life are less than those who are already very healthy. And when we look at community colleges, I feel very proud that we do reach out to everyone who can benefit from higher education. And I fear what's happening today, sometimes just de facto, when we get more and more CSU and UC redirects coming to our colleges. The students we're pushing out are the ones at the other end who need the most assistance. We cut their student services, and it's much easier for me as a faculty member to teach students who are UC eligible. I grade papers a lot faster. Students don't need as much counseling, etc. So I indicated that just yesterday the Joint Committee issued a report, and I don't think there are many surprises. They obviously rely on the Ledge Analyst's Office and other folks. They said that the state needs to set better goals for higher education. We need to maintain accessibility and affordability. They also, the 3 A's, talked about accountability of various kinds, and I think all of those are laudable, and yet I'm always cautious if the only outcome is degree completion in a certain number of years for all students, because I don't think that's realistic for many of our students. And better coordination and articulation among the segments. So what should we do is the ultimate question for us. As I mentioned before, I think opportunities to reach out to secondary, as you are doing here, including the EAP, is an important first step. We also have a bill called SB 1440 before the legislature right now, which proposes that community colleges offer degrees in a particular field, history, math, whatever, directly aimed at the CSU, and that would be a transfer degree that would directly take the student into junior status at CSU. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that bill, although I think it's still going to be tweaked a little bit, and one never knows what will happen when it gets tweaked. But I think that is a good first step as well. Ultimately, the financing of higher education is critical, and I think maintaining distinct missions. And I'll conclude with a short sort of summary here. The thing that is really special about community colleges is we really aim to be our community's college. We're not merely the junior colleges that we used to be. We move people from illiteracy to literacy, from unskilled workers to skilled, from high school dropouts to recipients of occupational certificates and associate degrees, and we move them from lower to upper division. The returning veteran and the re-entry 30-year-old mother or father each have a place in community colleges. I feel it's vital to protect the multiple missions of our community colleges as distinct from those of CSU and UC. I believe this is our niche and our strength. We know that California, or community colleges rather, are often referred to as democracies colleges because we really do open doors and possibilities for students. We have the most ethnically and racially diverse constituency, and we're very proud to serve the rich diversity that is California. We know that two-thirds of the CSU graduates begin in community colleges, and a third of UC students began in community colleges. We are clearly their gateway. So I am hopeful that the master plan's statement of commitment to access and affordability will be retained no matter where we end up. Patrick Callan at the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education said the following: "The most significant and apparently permanent departure from the master plan has been the abrogation of its foundational public policy commitment to college opportunity. That is, its commitment to make higher education available for every Californian who can benefit from college." I hope that this conclusion will resonate with all of y'all.
Anyways, I just want to say I just agree with them and move on. Just a couple things that I think I'd like to add to the equation, because Californians everywhere need to know this. I've been in 5 other states and worked at 5 other public universities: Illinois, Wisconsin, Kentucky, and North Carolina. I grew up in Florida. So in many ways, I can take a look. I'm not an expert on the master plan, but I have been working very closely with Assemblymember Ira Ruskin after we testified on behalf of some issues, particularly financial issues, to make some recommendations that we hope will almost become a preamble to the master plan as it progresses. And I want to compliment Assemblymember Ruskin for his insights and understanding some of the studies that we spent a lot of time on. I used to work at the Grapevine, which is at Illinois State University, and the Grapevine is the nation's supplier of state comparative data. I wonder if the master plan, when they envisioned and they talk about access, I wonder if they envisioned that California would fall 45th in the country in its support of children. Behind Kentucky, behind West Virginia, behind South Carolina, behind Alabama. I wonder if the master plan, when they envisioned it, would consider that California since 1980 would spend 47.7% less on higher education based on fiscal tax effort than it did 30 years ago on students and access, at a time that they're demanding universal access. I wonder if they even consider the balance that to remain among the most affordable higher education systems in the country, you must also remain among one of the most commonly supported higher education systems in the country. It is indeed this balance that has been screwed up so much. And I find when asked, do I believe the master plan still exists? And my comment is, yes, it does exist. In fact, it exists. The California master plan exists in North Carolina a lot better than it exists in the state of California. North Carolina copied it and took some variations to it, but it still believes that to remain among the most affordable, which they are, that they must remain among the most commonly supported from the citizenry of the state of North Carolina. This is where California has fallen down. And I find this sort of this exercise to revise the master plan is more of a diversion. It's a diversion that you generally get when legislators are year-round legislators and they need stuff to do and they're not going to pass a budget for 5 more months, about 4 months into our school year. It's an interesting diversion from the reality of what has just happened. And, you know, the budget cut that this college, and this strong college and our university and our schools have just endured had nothing to do with the principles and the guidelines of the master plan. In fact, if we hadn't spent time 2 years ago in Washington working with Senator Kennedy, John Tierney, Representative John Tierney in Massachusetts, and George Miller, our budgets would have been cut far more severely than they were, because what California did last year in issuing the greatest higher education cut in 60-year history, they cut the higher education budget right to the very threshold where they had to give back federal money, which is called a maintenance of effort provision. It protects Title I schools since 1965, and it protects Medicaid. California was one of about 16 states. The only guiding principle in funding that they used to cut higher education was when federal penalties would kick in and they'd have to give back money. And right now, it's the only protection that we have, because we're only $4 million away from having to give back hundreds of millions of dollars in federal stimulus funds. And think about that, in an $8.9 billion higher education budget, we cut our budget within $4 million of where money had to be given back to the federal government. It wasn't about growing demand, it wasn't about growing demographics, it wasn't about better and stronger educational attainment, access, and affordability. It was about getting reelected and not raising revenues for the right reasons in the state of California. It's about seeing priorities that have, from my perspective, coming from other states, priorities where you fund prisoners at $52,000, you fund students on my campus at $5,200. In fact, we're tinkering with the idea that maybe we should just incarcerate a couple of our students to get more money from the state of California. When you fall below states like Kentucky in funding, which are much poorer, California needs to really wake up in the support of children and students. Mark Twain once said that when the world ends, he wants to be in Kentucky, because Kentucky's always 20 years behind everybody else. They're not behind us in our consideration of funding children, in our consideration of funding students in a state that has growing, increasing demographic needs and economic needs for more college graduates. I think that what the future of the master plan should do is to incorporate some of the considerations that are vested within the California Constitution, which are the rights and liberties of the people of California to have strong, valued educational system. And the California Constitution is much stronger, makes a much stronger statement than does the master plan. And I support my colleague's comments about the master plan. When I read it through and through, it sounded to me a whole lot like what we dealt with in the state of Kentucky when we fought the universities. And we hired as many legislators as possible. And each legislature wanted a college campus in their district or a satellite campus in their district. The master plan seems to me to be more about what you should be doing and what we're going to hold you accountable for doing than it is what the state and the citizenry should be doing to expand and promote the great message and the considerations of education. And we made a recommendation that we hope would somehow seep its way into the master plan recommendations, that the preambles sound something like this. The California Master Plan envisions an adequate funding system that substantially advances the constitutionally prescribed rights and liberties of the people by providing affordable access to higher education opportunities for all qualified citizens of the state. The implementation of this plan and the legislature's initial adequate funding thereof resulted in a world-renowned higher education system. However, unfortunately, in recent years, the legislative fiscal commitment has severely eroded, and the promise of the once acclaimed system has fallen into a precipitous fiscal decline, the result of which has been to deprive students of access and the vast unpredictability of higher education costs for all those who are still able to attend. With full knowledge of the consequences of this underfunding of the master plan, it has become a matter of great urgency to return to the fiscal responsibility and the fiscal conditions that once provided the foundation for quality post-secondary education in California. As a primary obligation of the citizenry of California, the legislature needs to turn its attention once again to providing adequate funding and accommodating the constitutional ideas of the people of California. This is the biggest issue we're dealing with in a state that doesn't want to tackle this issue. And if it wasn't for the help of the federal government in tying federal economic stimulus dollars to our legislative behavior, we would have been cut far more last year and possibly cut far more this year in the next legislative decisions that come out of Sacramento. We're working to add this language. It's in the jobs bill that may come through, and you'll read about it. It's headed to the Senate. You'll know it as the Harkin bill. And these federally legislative protections are the only thing that has kept many of our institutions and schools from failing even further. For those of you that are in Long Beach, and I'll share this because we shared it with Martha Cantor, the Undersecretary of Education yesterday, who wants to get this in the hands of Secretary Duncan. This is the reward that our unified school system and our college and our university relationship has received. Despite the higher education funding cuts that we just mentioned, Long Beach Unified School District has been ranked among the top urban school districts in the United States the last 5 years in a row. They've ranked first, second, third, second, first, and has been recognized by President Obama as a model urban school district. It's not a small district. People think it must be a small district. We have 88,000 students in the Long Beach School District. 88,000 students is the same number of students in the Detroit, Michigan School District. But the reward for being the best urban school district in the United States was to send out 800 pink slips to teachers. Already in a state, in a school district, where the teacher-student ratio is the second highest in the United States. This discussion about the future of the master plan, if it doesn't incorporate these ideals and considerations, it is another wonderful diversion. It's a diversion from the realistic commitments that were made in the Constitution for the citizens and the people of the state of California. And this is where the discussion and the focus of all of our attention should be. Does California want to be a state that incarcerates everybody or educates everybody? And this is kind of how I see it. We have spent a lot of time working on the recommendations. We're completely supportive of articulating agreements through the legislature, like the state of Florida has done, so our students can come in and they don't waste a year getting called up or spending extra time taking units. There are things that we can do to improve efficiency. But there's a saying in the South that you can't squeeze blood out of a turnip. And in many ways, when this college, our schools, our university are among the most efficient already, our per-student expenditures are among the lowest in the United States. Our costs are among the lowest in the United States to students. And at some point, you can only be so low in your efficiency, because the first to go are access and affordability. The next to go will be quality. And that is a longer term and much harder thing to get back into a once world-renowned higher education system. So that's my perspective on this, and I look forward to discussing this a lot more with each and every one of you.
Well, as I said, the last time I was here, the words that I heard then from either the community college or town were words that deserved articulation of the campaign trail in a campaign for governor of the state of California. I now say the same thing, the same compliment to my colleague on my right.
I don't need that noise, but the point I'm making, I don't know where to begin because I don't want to step on what other people have said, is there needs to be a movement with a political campaign attached to it. Call on the state of California, people in the state of California, to rise up against the priorities that are really destroying the promise of community colleges and higher education. Given the demographic changes in the state, becoming a majority of people of color, given the needs of working people in the state as jobs are privatized or shipped overseas, it seems to me that there is a constituency that may lack campaign contribution power, but has voting power. But the constituency is never called upon in state politics for reasons that we can go into. But it's there. It is really there. Recently, for example, I saw that there was a poll by my old colleague Patrick Allen, who's still fighting the fight, in which a majority of Americans in general, and I'm sure this would be true for the people of California, were in favor of using federal stimulus money to cut and eliminate tuition for this generation of students. Even the poll question said, even if that meant there was less money for operations, I'm sure some of my colleagues wouldn't like that. The point I'm making is that people want the government to save affordable college education, no matter what the consequences are. And in response to that, the American Council on Education spokesperson said, quote, "The public's not always right." So that's the issue. Let's go back to the day. After the 60s, the Carnegie Commission did a survey of higher education. And this is a study that affirmed the master plan at the time. But they cited the same kind of elitist authority that I've just mentioned coming from the American Council on Education. They cited Sir Eric Ashby in pronouncing what the philosophy of higher education should be. And I'm quoting, "All civilized countries," I don't know who that leaves out, but obviously it must leave out a lot of people, otherwise there would be no reason for the adjective. "All civilized countries depend upon a thin, clear stream of excellence." A thin, clear stream of excellence to provide new ideas and so on and so forth, and solutions to complex social and political problems. A thin, clear stream of excellence it resonates, in my mind, with the Los Angeles Police Department philosophy of the thin blue line, protecting civilization from the malcontents. It reminds me, going further back, of the founding formulation that still resonates, the NAACP, that the talented tenth would rise rise through the educational institutions to provide a future where a Barack Obama could be elected president. And so it's not a concept that I dismiss at all. It does leave us with the fact that we have elected an African-American president, and the school dropout rates in South Central are over 50%. In fact, real dropout rates are hidden. And the lack of progress at the University of California, and to a lesser extent CSU, in African-American admissions is a crime. It's a crime. So the concept of a thin, clear stream of excellence as educational theory places only a few people with access to the advanced degrees, and the rest of us are in the laboring classes, the working classes, and in hard budget times, the gap gets broadened. So to me, it's more of a political issue, and I don't know how I can advise you because I'm not offering myself as a candidate. It takes will for somebody to go out there, but I guarantee you, you light a match and there will be people who will want this issue addressed. It will not be resolved in the inner sanctum of the legislature. And leave for you the May 1986 report called Beyond the Master Plan that I did with, was it Christopher or shortly after? Yeah. I asked Christopher to become the chief consultant of the Higher Education Committee because I wanted to turn the world upside down. I wanted to have a student, a recent graduate, run the committee on educational policy so that the segments would have to deal with the student for the first time, perhaps, in that arena. And over time, Christopher went to the segments. So we have to have another plan. I mean, Christopher, he's a mayor, he could run for governor. But I tell you, it has to be done on the outside. And many of the achievements of higher education, like equal opportunity programs, women's studies, black studies, Chicano studies, environmental studies, queer studies, they've all been created by riots and mobs and protesters and demonstrators who are long forgotten, as if these programs were produced by the highest level of the institutions, when in fact they were resisted and opposed. But the public is coming from a different place than the institutions. Often happens in our country's history. An adjustment can only be made, a change can only be made by that kind of pressure. Specifically, I think the civil rights establishment in the state needs to sue the university system over the lack of equal opportunity to higher education as evidenced by the failure of the transfer function over a 50-year period. It is a civil rights issue, it is a constitutional issue. I would go farther than my colleague. Trying to get the legislature to recognize a constitutional right is an impossibility. Better to rely on the Constitution as it now is written and argue that there's a fundamental denial in equal opportunity, equal educational opportunities. It could be remedied, but only by pressure from the outside, by the threat of legal action and political action. You might be able to straighten out the inequalities and stratification system that exists at the heart of the master plan. Let me be a little more specific there. The master plan may or may not have the force of law, but as Christopher said, it has a controlling function on the mind of the legislature and the state's media, as if it's on the level with these other founding documents. In reality, it's largely a jurisdictional fix between quarreling institutions over money. Like a labor dispute has been settled by the master plan. The democratic premise of the master plan, however, I would say is this, that somehow, and I don't know the social history, somehow progressive forces on the inside and outside managed to develop the community college system coming out of California. It's one of the state's greatest achievements. And it's about democratic opportunity for people who have fallen by the wayside or didn't do well in high school or are returning to work. It's an opportunity for education that didn't exist in this country until the community colleges were created. And it's a direct contradiction to the idea of the thin, clear stream of excellence. This notion of the community colleges of education that's affordable and accessible for all. So the master plan needs saving and rebuilding in terms of the community college provisions, but I'd be the first to agree that you have to go beyond it. And if that's politically impossible, forget it. Just legislate and test whether the master plan is prevailing law. I'm just not sure that it is. Let me be specific, because sometimes people, we have a society that has a middle-class consciousness, even for people that will never make it to the middle class. And this middle-class consciousness obfuscates the social and economic reality sometimes. So envision the master plan as a pyramid, a hierarchical pyramid that represents a class structure and a structure of the distribution of wealth and income and tax dividends. There's actually a little point above the pyramid. That would be where I teach currently at Scripps College, which emulates the East Coast Ivy League colleges. The master plan is designed to have the people at the top of the pyramid get as close as possible to the privatized educational system that I now teach in. The Harvard was the model. And so there had to be a way that public institutions could have a tax-funded hierarchical model. And the model was to go after the 12.5% and define them as the thin, clear stream of excellence. So at the top of the pyramid, you have the University of California, where the students who are always doing well, already doing very well, have the most tax money per capita showered on them. The professors who teach the least in the classroom have the most income and benefits of anyone. The administrators are sky high and tending towards what I'll finish with, the financialization of the university model. All right? Then in the middle is the middle class. That's the CSU system. And we think so little of education in the premises of this plan that we say just the middle class, more mediocre segment of the pyramid should produce all the teachers for the state. And the people at the top of the pyramid, the UC students, that's always been a fight to even get that to be mandated as an option. I think it was 6% of all teachers in California came out of UC when I was around back in the day. And it doesn't change very much. So the CSU professors make less than the UC professors for doing more work. The state spends less per capita on the CSU students than they do on the UC students, even though those students are deemed the future of a robust California middle class. They're not treated like that in terms of the status hierarchy and the funding that goes with it. Then you come to the bottom of the pyramid, which is the 1 million or 2 million community college students, who, as everybody has said, should get the greatest investment because of their larger numbers and because of what an educated working class and middle class can do for our neighborhoods, for our families, for our state, for state revenue. But of course, the community colleges have had to struggle to get post-secondary status. It used to be that they were part of the high school realm of education. They struggle in the master plan to be considered part of post-secondary, and that's about it. Their faculty gets paid the least. Their students receive the least funding per capita from the state. Even though you would think in a sane planet that you would want to put the best teachers and the most money on the line to improve the overall talent and education level of the majority of people. That's not what this does, because the premise is that those people are needed for the lower rungs of the economy and are not destined to become part of the thin, clear stream of excellence. That's the way it is, ladies and gentlemen. That's the way it is. And that is so far removed from what the average person in the state thinks, not to mention what the average person in the state needs. Only people who are tied into this system have an interest in perpetuating it, except for fringe adjustments here or there. I'm all for fighting for fringe adjustments, you know, to prevent a 1% decrease in funding. If we have to go to war for that, I'm there. Sign me up. But you'll never fight those fights if you don't have reserve power and additional power that makes it possible for you to consider completely reconceiving the pyramid as a triangle of partnership between different institutions. A further equalization of educational opportunity is the way to turn the master plan from a pyramid to a triangle. If you see it that way, that everybody's in it together, and don't forget the public schools, those kids. There has to be a relationship between all these segments of higher education, but it doesn't have to be as absolutely stratified and walled off with no bridges beyond transfer to make it possible for people to cross to their true potential in terms of human and economic capital. I'll leave it there, but I commend you for holding these discussions. I have been involved not as systematically as my friend, I respect very much Mr. Cabaldon, but I have a memory and I'm at your service. Thank you.
Thank you.